Hello, I'm Larry Wilson. Please join me for another 15-minute Bible study on the Jubilee Calendar. Today is part 1 of 6. Please stop and watch seminar number 310 before proceeding with this seminar. Seminar number 310 is a 4-part study which proves beyond reasonable argument that Jesus was crucified in AD 30. Because the date of Christ's death and resurrection is critical to the Jubilee calendar, you should watch that seminar before proceeding with this seminar. In order to spend as much time as possible on the Jubilee calendar, I assume the viewer has some understanding of the topics that were presented in seminar number 310. Please click here to watch seminar number 310 if you want to watch it. The Jubilee calendar is a worthwhile study for several reasons. Here are 2. First, God established a theocracy when He delivered the descendants of Jacob out of Egypt. Since the fall of Adam and Eve, God has never been so visible in the affairs of a nation as He was when He served as Israel's king. By divine authority, He extracted one people out of another. He established Israel as a nation. He created its economy and ordained Israel's yearly cycle. All festivals and sabbatical years were calculated by the operation of God's calendar, which is often referred to as the Jubilee calendar. Although many pastors and scholars do not allocate much importance to the Jubilee calendar, this calendar has left a legacy for dating ancient events that has no equal. This calendar forced Israel to record a number of historical events which would otherwise be unknown today. It also enables us to locate ancient events with a precision that is uncommon. The second reason for studying the Jubilee calendar is more important than the first. When properly understood, the Jubilee calendar is vitally important to students of apocalyptic prophecy because its presence and absence determines how the 17 prophecies in Daniel and Revelation align. The books of Daniel and Revelation contain 18 prophetic time periods, and a correct understanding of the Jubilee calendar is required if you want to understand when time should be translated as a day for a year and when time should not be translated. The Bible says that God implemented the Jubilee calendar 15 days before the Exodus took place. In Exodus 12, 1 and 2, we read, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, 'This month is to be for you the first month of your year.'" This declaration may not sound like a big deal, but it was. God established a new yearly cycle for Israel because at the time of the Exodus, the Israelites were observing the Egyptian calendar, which was a summer-to-summer calendar. Archaeologists and astronomers believe that New Year's Day in Egypt took place with the annual sighting of the star Sirius, and this annual sighting occurred sometime between July 17 and July 20. Therefore, God's decree in Exodus 12 set Israel's calendar apart from the Egyptian calendar by moving New Year's Day to the spring rather than the summer. We typically think of a calendar as 12 pieces of paper bundled together with pretty pictures hanging on a wall, or maybe a nice graphic in a computer or cell phone window. We owe this convenience to Julius Caesar, who implemented the calendar we use today in 45 BC. Now, Caesar's calendar was refined in 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII to better compensate for the endless fractions involved with orbital geometry, but the essence of Caesar's 2,000-year-old calendar remains unchanged. Caesar wanted a year to begin that had no solar or lunar significance. So, today, New Year's Day occurs at a time that has nothing to do with anything. January 1 begins on an insignificant day in the dead of winter for no other reason than Julius Caesar woke up one morning and decided the world needed a calendar that had nothing to do with the sun or the moon. Over the centuries, Caesar's calendar has been grudgingly accepted by various nations, and today it serves the global economy of the world very well. Prior to Julius Caesar, however, every tribal nation used a different calendar. Many ancient calendars were dated according to the reign of its king, and each time a king died, a new king and a new calendar began. But tribal calendars were crude and error-prone because the variables in orbital geometry are always changing. It is mathematically very difficult to create a solar-lunar calendar that stays in perfect alignment with the sun and the moon. And given the cultural and religious hostilities that existed between ancient nations, there was no reason that any two nations should ever share the same calendar. The Bible does not provide or explain every detail involved with the operation of the Jubilee calendar, but archaeology helps us understand how many things were done in ancient times. For example, archaeology reveals the Egyptians were very advanced in astronomy and mathematics between 1600 and 1100 BC, and Egypt was at its peak as an empire during this time. Evidence has been found showing that the Egyptians used shadow clocks or sundials to measure the hours of a day as early as 1500 BC. We also know from archaeology that the Egyptians used a solar calendar having 12 months of 30 days, 360 days for the civil year. And when the year ended, 5 or 6 days were appended to the calendar so that the length of an Egyptian year was either 365 or 366 days. These extra calendar days were appended at the end of 12 months because New Year's Day fell on the day Sirius became visible at dawn, and this happened sometime around July 17 to 20. We also know the ancient Egyptians observed a day from dawn to dawn. The Egyptian week was a 10-day week, and their year had 3 seasons: the flooding season when the Nile overflowed, the growing season, and the harvest season. To appreciate some of the changes that Israel experienced at the Exodus, we need to compare Egyptian timing with God's timing. God's day is from sundown to sundown, not dawn to dawn. God's week is 7 days, not 10 days. God's month is from one new moon to another, and God's year varies in length. It can have 12 or 13 lunar months in it, depending on orbital geometry. And finally, God's year has 4 seasons. And given the fact that Moses lived in Egypt 40 years before he ran to the desert to escape Pharaoh's wrath for killing an Egyptian, and given the fact that Moses received the highest and the best education that a son of Pharaoh could receive, it is helpful in our study on the Jubilee calendar to know something about the Egyptian way of life at the time of the Exodus. God is very serious about time and timing, and he required Israel to keep careful records. Shortly after the Exodus, God said to Israel, Exodus 31:16, the Israelites are to observe the 7th-day Sabbath, celebrating it for the generations to come as a lasting covenant. Verse 17, "It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he abstained from work and rested." Think about this. The observance of God's seventh-day Sabbath occurs at regular intervals, and its presence defines a weekly cycle that began at creation week. God also imposed other timing considerations on Israel. For example, God required ancient Israel to observe new moon feasts in Numbers 28:14. But the Bible does not explicitly tell us how the arrival of a new moon was determined. In seminar number 310, we discovered the solution to this mystery. We found that God considers a new moon to occur at conjunction, because Jesus and his disciples observed Passover at a conjunction-based date, whereas the nation of Israel observed Passover on a date that is determined by sighting the first crescent of a moon. Therefore, this explains why the Bible indicates that 2 Passovers were observed on 2 different days during the week of Christ's death. The point to remember here is that when Bible records and archaeology work together, we can reasonably determine how and why the ancients did certain things. The Jubilee calendar was a far more complicated calendar than the Egyptian calendar. God's calendar requires pen and paper, but it also requires faithful and careful observation of the sun and moon. The Jubilee calendar tracked cycles of 49 years, cycles of 7 years, 4 seasons per year, 12 or 13 months per year, weeks of 7 days, and special feast days that began at sundown. I have mentioned these things to help you understand that when the Exodus took place, the nation of Israel had to give a lot of attention to something that previously meant very little. This something was time itself. At the Exodus, the Jews began to watch the heavens with interest and regularity in order to record the passage of time and to anticipate a number of timely events which God required them to observe. For example, it was just mentioned that God required Israel to observe new moon festivals. Obviously, this requirement mandated record-keeping and observation so that new moon festivals were observed at the appointed time. Look at this verse from Psalm 81, verses 3 and 4. "Blow the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Israel and a law of the God of Jacob." God also required Israel to observe Passover in 3 steps. We studied this in seminar number 310. The sacrificial lamb or goat had to be separated from the other animals on the 10th day of the first month. And then the sacrificial animal was slain at twilight on the 14th day of the first month, and the Passover meal was eaten at midnight on the 15th day of the first month. And we learned in seminar number 310 that God required Israel to cut off anyone from the nation who did not observe Passover at the appointed time. See Numbers 9:13. Because God required different feasts to be observed at specific times, the importance of determining the first day of each month was critical, as well as the first day of each year. We know from seminar number 310 that locating the arrival of a new moon when a new moon cannot be seen is a bit of a problem. A new moon cannot be seen at conjunction because there is no light shining on the surface of the moon that faces Earth. Therefore, the arrival of conjunction has to be calculated. On the surface, this calculation appears to be simple. If one month has 29 days and the next month has 30 days, the total number of days is 59. And it just so happens that 2 lunar cycles also amount to 59 days. So if we compare the two equations, we find that 29 plus 30 equals 59 days, and 2 lunar cycles, each being 29 and a half days in length, also equals 59 days. So having 1 month of 29 and 1 month of 30 days equals 59 days keeps up with the lunar cycles quite well. However, a lunar cycle is actually a few minutes longer than 29 and a half days, and this additional time accumulates after a while. The additional time was corrected every now and then with a leap month. A leap month was a month that lasted 30 days when it should have lasted 29 days. So this means that on occasion, 2 months, each having 30 days, took place back to back, and this kept the monthly cycle aligned with lunar cycles. I'll say more about this topic later on, but for now we're out of time. Please bookmark and share this video with your friends and proceed to the next segment.